Hello, welcome again. This week has been a very interesting week because while discussing literature in the context of language, society and culture, we have been discussing different ways of reading literature and how each way of reading literature contributes to our understanding of society as well as our understanding of literature, pitfalls of reading literature in a particular way, strengths of reading literature in a particular way. As part of that, we have already discussed feminist literary criticism, Marxist literary criticism and other schools of criticism, and how each of them works in their own way and analyzes a work of art from a vantage perspective. So, in this class, we are going to discuss post-colonial literary criticism. In other words, how do post-colonial theorists, how do post-colonial critics look at a work of art, look at a literary piece and analyze it. So, before we go into the details, in a manner recalling random association test that psychiatrists use, let me give you particular concepts, or I am going to invoke a word, and whatever the image that comes to your mind, you will jot it down in your papers. And this is a kind of a regular activity we do in the class. Say for instance, when I say in the very first of the classes, I announce the word, if I ask you to think of Africa, or the moment I utter the word Africa, what does the word evoke in you? What kind of concepts the word evokes in you? Or if you think using the imagery of color, what color comes to your mind and why does that happen? Second, if I say darkness, just I utter the word darkness, what is the quality associated with the word darkness? Well, in most of these cases, without a blink of an eye, many of the students would respond to these colors in a very negative way. They have a kind of a pejorative meaning associated with the concept of Africa. The moment I say Africa, either they say the continent of the dark, impoverished, not developed, and if I say the word darkness, automatically in most of the cases they say it's evil. So, why am I invoking this particular concept here? It is going to be evident in a very short while. Before that, of course, we need to understand what is post-colonial criticism, what is post-coloniality. Let us take a quicker look at the concept. Post-colonialism as a literary theory evokes a particular approach towards the study of former colonies, the colonies which were subjugated to the imperial rule or the colonial rule, and the cultural hegemony, their mindset and their works of literature, the entire culture and all these things. So, it is a kind of a critical, theoretical, philosophical approach towards understanding the colonized nations, once upon a time the colonized nations. The second understanding of post-colonialism is it deals with the study of South Asian nations, African nations, Caribbean nations that were once a part of the British imperial rule. So, the concept of nation, the concept of culture, the concept of subjectivity, the concept of identity. So, how do these factors get affected by the fact that these countries were once a part of the British imperial rule? What are the consequences of that? So, we are going to study all that in this particular lens, through this particular lens. Post-colonialism as a philosophical tool also analyzes the ethical, socio-political concerns about the cultural identity, subjectivity, the concepts of race, nationality, ethnicity, gender, language, power equations and all that, okay, vis-a-vis of course the British imperial state. Extending our understanding of the concept of imperialism, you may have seen Post-colonialism written in two different ways. One is with a hyphen between post and colonialism, the other is post-colonialism. So, you may be wondering, or you may have wondered, if there is any difference between the two concepts, or if you could use them interchangeably. Well, the term post-colonialism without any hyphen between them refers to the concept of the subjugation without any time period attached to that. It is an ideology, a socio-political movement, or even a cultural movement that critiques the colonial rule, its motives, even after the period of colonization, or much before even the period of colonization. Well, here the concept of colony matters, albeit in a tangential way, but all other forms of domination, all other forms of subjugation, all other forms of control also are studied here. In that sense, it is a slightly more comprehensive term. If we use post-colonialism, the hyphenated post-colonialism, well, it refers to all these things during the period of colonization and immediately afterwards. It is the period after colonialism, as the term states, post-colonialism, after the withdrawal of the empire, then the cultural consequences, political consequences, and the social consequences of the withdrawal of the colony, and the kind of mental state it entails on the once subjected colonized people. So, it is going to study all this. That is a kind of a minor difference that we need to keep in mind while using the term post-colonialism. All right. Okay, moving ahead, why is the study of post-colonialism important? Okay. Before we answer that question, let us take a quick look at a short poem that is almost acts as a cultural manifesto for people who advocate colonialism. It is by Rudyard Kipling, an extraordinary writer, and unfortunately who exhibited clear and indisputable signs of coloniality and colonialism in his writings. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best you breed, go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new caught, sullen peoples, half devil and half child. The entire poem is filled with a kind of an advocacy for imperialism or colonialism. So, look at the very first line, white man's burden. In fact, what is the reason behind, is there any logical reason behind colonialism? Because all of us right now know that subjugating anybody, forget a race, even another individual, is inhuman and immoral. That is now a common understanding, right? And it should have been a common understanding even earlier. So, what could be the logic behind the philosophical and the political manifestation of colonialism, annexing someone else's land and creating a kind of domination over them? What could be the logic behind that? This is the logic, white man's burden. According to this, the white races felt that it was their duty to educate people of other races, because other people, the people of other races were incapable of civilization, were incapable of leading a dignified life, were incapable of leading an organized, cultured, civilized life. Therefore, these guys arrogated upon themselves a kind of a socio-political responsibility and called it white man's burden. And look at their attitude towards the people they are about to subjugate. They consider them half devil and half child. Therefore, it is their divine duty to educate these illiterates. So, that is the kind of logic they used in order to further the imperialist agenda. So, in a sense, this particular poem illustrates the logic behind colonialism, and also displays it also kind of displays their mindset. And the image that we have used here is quite evocative. Look at the kind of how using all their might, using all their strength, how they are subjugating other lands, other people, other races. So this poem also helps you in understanding the actual motives behind colonization, and how in order for us to understand these so called hypocritical notions of white man's burden, and how in order to reclaim our identity, how in order to reclaim our subjectivity, we need the help of post-colonialism. This is what we study in the concept of post-colonialism. And when applied to literature, of course, post-colonial critics tend to analyze these things and much more. All right. Before we proceed further, we need to slightly understand the concept between colonialism and imperialism. Colonialism is a kind of an umbrella term and an overall term that is also used for annexing the cultural landscapes, not just the political or the geographical landscapes, but the psychological landscapes, the cultural landscapes of a race, and how you subject them to a kind of how you enslave them in order to further the agenda of imperialism. On the other hand, imperialism is a highly political tool, wherein here you try to annex somebody's land as well. It is a total control, taking a total control of it, while the concept of colonialism helps us in understanding the concept of establishing colonies culturally and metaphorically. Imperialism is a direct aggression, it is a direct annexing of the lands, and thereby taking total control of a race and a society and a nation. So, going ahead, in this particular map you get a picture of the nations that were once a part of the colony. Well, on the last count you have more than 50 countries that were part of the British Empire, which are now of course post-colonial nations, though they are no longer under the rulership of the British monarchy. Still, of course, for the sake of some kind of political connections, they are still called Commonwealth countries, though now the concept of Commonwealth countries is slightly getting dated. It gives us a picture of the kind of societies, nations that were once a part of the British colony. Okay. Now, before proceeding further in this discussion of post-colonialism or post-colonial literary criticism, we need to have a fair understanding of some common terms that are used in post-colonial discourse. Okay, before that, of course, here is an interesting meme that I want you to look at, So, Africa then and Africa now, how is it connected to the concept we are reading? We will get to know shortly. First one is the concept of mimicry, So, it is the concept that was promulgated and also popularized by a very well known post-colonial critic, South Asian critic Homi K. Bhabha in The Location of Culture and other books. So, it is the act of colonial subjects trying to copy the culture and habits of their colonial masters. What happens if a particular race has been subjected to a kind of hegemony over a long period of time? What happens? It results in a kind of psychological suppression of the identity of the colonized people, as a result of which the colonized people lose their sense of identity, lose their sense of subjectivity, and start imitating their masters, without their actually knowing it. That creates a state of mimicry, It's a very pathetic state that happens when there is a total self-abnegation, abnegation of a culture, when a race negates its own identity, the value of its own culture, the value of its own worth. That's when it starts copying its masters, and it results in a state of mimicry. Most of the times, in not a positive word, it leads to a parody of it. Okay. So, one of the important concepts is well, if you have noticed in India, for example, if you have to take up the concept of India, even now, though people are not very proficient in speaking English, you may have seen people speaking in English, though they do not have a fair command over English, and even when it is not warranted, not required, they start speaking in English because there is a cultural assumption behind it. And what is it? That if you speak English well, that means it's a sign of being cultured, it's a sign of being educated, whereas speaking English has nothing it has got nothing to do with being civilized, being educated. We know that, but many people do not seem to know that. So, a blind imitation of speaking in English is what is called mimicry. And hybridity is a result of that. When you start mimicking people, well, it creates a kind of a hybrid space. Well, it creates a kind of a Trishankusvarga. You are neither here nor there, a kind of an in-between state. So, something like that, it is a creation of that kind of an in-between space. Neocolonialism, that is a very important term. Well, this concept, according to this concept, though there is no longer a colony today, because these nations which were once colonies are no longer subjected to, politically subjected to any the rule of any political nation, right? They have achieved independence, they have attained freedom. Nevertheless, even to this day, colony is working in ways that we do not see it, especially in the form of economic dominance, cultural dominance, and all other ways. We may be politically free, but still we are economically enslaved to their concept. Theoretically we are enslaved, philosophically we are enslaved, culturally we are enslaved. So, neocolonialism, the concept of neocolonialism discusses this. In fact, in the meme that you see here, or in the cartoon that you see here, Africa then and Africa now. Africa is a post-colonial state now. Nevertheless, once upon a time, you can see here was a slave who was subjected to the monarchy, the British monarchy ruled over them. Now, it is the West in the form of multinational corporations that have captured African nation through their loans and things like that. Even to this day, the entire continent is indebted to them economically, culturally, and in many other ways. That is the concept of neocolonialism. Moving ahead, here are some more concepts. Ambivalence, again, it relates to a kind of an undecided state, ambivalent position vis-a-vis the British subjects. As a result of it, again, this is a continuation of the concept of mimicry, hybridity, and now it is ambivalence, a kind of being unsure of your own worth, your own identity. Orientalism is a very important concept. Orientalism is vis-a-vis the Occident and the Orient. Orientalism is a term that is referred to, the West refers to the Eastern countries, Eastern cultures as the Oriental cultures, Oriental people. So, this was a term popularized by Edward Said in Orientalism in his important work Orientalism, more of it in the subsequent slides. The concept of diaspora is very important. The concept of diaspora refers to an enforced migration. It could even be a voluntary migration of people from their native homelands. Earlier during the days of colonization, people were loaded in ships, cargoes, and went and sold in slave market, slave trades. So, there it is a kind of a forced migrants, that's how the empire treated its subjects, the subjects were sold in slave market. So, there it is a forced migration, and these days it is voluntary migration. Even when we say voluntary, it is not so much voluntary, but almost forced in a different way. Subaltern, that is another important concept. Subaltern is a term that refers to the colonized classes or the lower classes who have little access to their own means of expression. So, again, this concept was popularized during the subaltern movement in post-colonial theory, especially popularized by Gayatri Spivak in her remarkable article, Can the Subaltern Speak? This is another important concept. Well, in the previous classes we discussed how, let us say for instance in the context of Marxism, how the world was divided into the haves and the have-nots, right, the bourgeois and the proletariat. That is how they discriminated. How in the context of feminism, using gender, using the sexes like the male and the female, the man and the woman, how the concept of subjugation went on. Here the concept of subjugation goes on as self and the other. Self refers to the empire, the other refers to the colonized people and how they were denied an agency, subjectivity of their own. Here is a beautiful poem by Sujata Bhatt that talks of the concept of diaspora, the concept of mimicry, the concept of ambivalence and all that. Look at this beautiful poem. You ask me what I mean by saying I have lost my tongue. I ask you, what would you do if you had two tongues in your mouth and lost the first one, the mother tongue, and could not really know the other, the foreign tongue? You could not use them both together even if you thought that way. Well, the poem goes on in this way and the tongue here refers to language and the loss of tongue refers to loss of culture, loss of language, because language, metaphorically speaking, we have already discussed the two roles of language. One is the role of language as a custodian of culture. So, if you lose a language, you lose the key to access the culture. So, this results in mimicry, hybridity and things like that, loss of identity. So, the poem beautifully discusses how with the imposition of English. Now, look at what happens in these post-colonial nations, especially in Africa and India. Now, though English was the language through which we were subjected to their control, even today after independence, 75 years after independence, we still use English as language of education, a mode of communication across our own people. So, this is a kind of a strange state. This is a kind of a strange state. We have lost access to our own tongues, as a result of which we are being alienated from our own cultures. So, this has created in a kind of an alienation in different senses. The poem beautifully discusses all these things in a very interesting manner. So, as discussed earlier, as post-colonial critics, what do they actually do? Well, post-colonial critics study these methods, the methods through which the colonizers subjected the colonized people and robbed them of their own dignity, robbed them of their own identity and things like that. They also discuss the politics of knowledge, how the colonizers' understanding of the colonized gave them, because here knowledge is power, we have already heard that, right? By knowing more about us, they use that knowledge in order to, subjugate us, in order to politically control us, culturally control us. So, post-colonial critics throw light on all these concepts that resulted in our loss of statehood, in our loss of selfhood, in our loss of identity and things like that. So, accordingly, post-colonial literary criticism deals with how a literary text represents these aspects, by what methods the colonial oppression took place, by what methods the post-colonial subjects begin acquiring their identity back, what is the process of hybridity and things like that. These are some of the broad concerns of post-colonial critics. Well, if we need to chart out the cartography of post-colonialism, then by getting to know about these important thinkers, we can understand what post-colonialism all about. Frantz Fanon, Edward Said, Homi K. Bhabha, Gayatri Spivak, Ngugi Wa Thiong. Of course, this list is not exhaustive. No list is exhaustive, we must know that by now. So, fair understanding of their work would reveal to us the methods through which colonizers advanced their agenda and the means through which the colonized subject reclaimed or would be reclaiming their identity and things like that. So, I am sure with the help of their writings, we would be able to understand the concept of post-colonialism in a little better way. All right. So, these methods that we have learnt during these weeks, they are of course no way exhaustive ways of reading literature. What I have said was these are major ways of reading literature, and each of these ways has their own political agenda. They have they would like to sensitize, they plan to sensitize individual using literature as a means. They want to sensitize individual towards their political goals, their political agendas. That means to create awareness about the concepts that they hold dear to them. I am sure these are not exhaustive as we have been discussing, they are just illustrative, so, in the next class, what we plan to do is, now that we know different ways of reading literature, one is like a layperson read a work of art as they are, the other is to read it with a particular agenda and get ourselves sensitized towards the cultural imperatives, the cultural imperatives that create these literary texts, and many other ways like this. So, in the subsequent classes, we would be delving deeply into literature, different forms of literature in a more detailed manner. Thank you.